Hello everyone, welcome to another Engines of SEPTA. I'm trying to make this series more active than it has been, but thanks to college and the documentaries, it's not easy. Now before I start, I must announce my GoFundMe page where you can donate any money you have in support to keep this channel running. The link, of course, is in the description. Thank you for the love. Now with that taken care of, it's time to talk about the AEM-7. Now, in order to not copy what was said in the Engines of Amtrak episode on this engine, I'll only do a brief summary of how the engine came to be, but if you want to learn more about the AEM-7, go to the link below to the episode. Go on, I'll wait. So you chose to stick with me. Good man. Let's get started. In 1968, the Pennsylvania Railroad and New York Central, once bitter rivals in their heyday, merged together to create Penn Central in order to keep rail travel in their respected areas alive and safe.
Wrong.
No, actually it was a disaster, and the government put a gun to the head of the Pennsylvania Railroad in order to make them merge. In the 1970s, Penn Central was desperate for money. In fact, between 1968 and 1974, according to a federal funding film, Penn Central suffered 649 derailments between that time period. The railroad was also suffering from old equipment, failing ridership, and terrible track conditions. In 1971, Amtrak was formed, aimed at saving interstate rail travel, and Penn Central made the rather silly but desperate choice selling off the Northeastern Corridor trackage rights to Amtrak. Amtrak began to slowly modernize the corridor, but wanted some new engines, as their current fleet contained the Bud Metroliners, which were complete failures, and antique GG1s, which, although very reliable and efficient, were aging, big, and parts were rather scarce. Amtrak tried first with the GE-E60, which promised a speed guarantee of 125 miles an hour. However, after a series of swaying issues and the derailment of one test run, it was found that the three-axle freight-style trucks was to blame. So the E60 was limited to 80 miles per hour max on the Keystone service, heavier long-distance trains, and even mile work, which seemed to fit the engine much better than passenger service. Some GG1s had to be re-geared from running from 80 miles an hour to 110 miles an hour to fit new schedules. Amtrak threw the hat in the ring again, borrowing two foreign engines, one from France and one from Sweden. Amtrak liked the Swedish design, the RC4, and thus the AEM-7 was born, purchasing 54, numbered 900 to 953. The AEM-7 passed tests of 125 miles an hour with flying colors, and Amtrak could finally retire their GG1s. Thankfully, plenty of them are still around. Two commuter railroads, however, watched Amtrak closely and were very impressed by the AEM-7 and thought, hey, let's get some of those engines and put them into commuter operations. Mark was the first one to put their foot in the water, purchasing 4 in 1986, numbered 4900 to 4903. SEPTA would follow in 1988 with 7, numbered 2301 through 2307. The Amtrak bodies were made by Bud, while the SEPTA and Mark ones were from the Austrian firm Simmering Gras Parker. I hope I pronounced that right. The AEM-7s measured 51 feet in length, 10 feet 2 inches in width, and weighed around 92 tons. The AEM-7s had a top speed of 125 miles an hour, or they could go 130 miles an hour if wanted, but SEPTA's maximum service speed was around 90 miles an hour. They also had 7,000 horsepower, obviously that's what the 7 stands for, with continuous tractive effort of 28,100 pounds by force. As you probably expected, the AEM-7s all had K5LA horns. Here's a few samples. AEM-7s, however, weren't the very first engines to be used in push-pull services. Back in the 70s, when regional rail was still operated by Conrail and the respective private railroads, they used X-Reading F7s with one on each end, and sometimes a third if needed, running on the diesel routes in the areas like Bethlehem, Allentown, Quakertown, among other areas. But this was cut in 1981 when diesel service was abolished. When the AEM-7s came into the picture, SEPTA decided, due to a rise in ridership, to bring this kind of service back, but for their electrified routes. They also purchased 25 Comet 2 coaches with 10 cab cars in 1987, along with 10 Comet 3 coaches in 1999. The Comet 2s were called SEPTA 1s, and the 3s were called SEPTA 2s. SEPTA also had one ex-New Jersey Transit set of Comet 1s. Of course, as we all know, the cab cars had K5LA horns just like the AEM-7s, with the exception of the Comet 1, which had a Leslie RS3L, but I think we already know how they sound. At first, they were used throughout the system, even appearing on the Maniac Norristown and the Lansdale-Doylestown lines on express services. But this didn't last too long, as nowadays push-pull sets usually only run on the Paoli-Thorndale, Wilmington-Newark, West Trenton, and on some occasions the Media-Elwyn line. Why is that?
Well, SEPTA has one of, if not the shortest distance between stations. This would mean that the AEM-7 would have to be accelerating and decelerating back to back a lot. That puts a lot of stress on the brake shoes of the engine. And of course, an AEM-7 with coaches can't accelerate up to speed as fast as something like a Silverliner 4 set. Also, you gotta take consideration of the fleet size. You only got 7 AEM-7s and 1 ALP-44. We'll talk about that later. So, 1 or 2 of the engines would have to be sitting out of service for maintenance work, and you've got the rest of the engines doing all the express runs. It's a pretty small fleet size, and then you've got hundreds upon hundreds of Silverliners doing everything else. So it's these two reasons why you only see the AEM-7s on these certain lines during the rush hour periods.
SEPTA would add an ALP-44 to the push-pull fleet, number 2308, in 1996, which complemented the way of the AEM-7 very nicely. But that engine has a totally different story, which will be covered in the next episode. None of the AEM-7s officially ever got a rebuilt like its Amtrak counterparts, but 2305 is an exception, as it was severely damaged by floodwaters in 2011 while in Trenton Yard thanks to Hurricane Irene, which devastated the Northeast, and boy did it really screw up my area. But the engine was later rebuilt as if nothing had happened. Sadly, as we all know, the engines wouldn't last forever, as they all would enter over 35 years of service, and it was clear that time was catching up to them. In 2010, Amtrak
Ordered 70
ACS-64 locomotives from Siemens to replace the AEM-7s and their new Bombardier HHP-8s, which were also deemed a failure. The ACS-64s began entering revenue service for Amtrak in February of 2014, and soon the fleet was retired, with the last two AEM-7s, 942 and 946, making their final run on June 18, 2016, on a farewell excursion that ran from Washington to Philadelphia. 2 Amtraks have been preserved so far, 915 going to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania, which I plan to revisit in the future, and 945 going to the Illinois Railroad Museum. Some DCs were scrapped, while others, mainly the ACs, are awaiting their fate in Wilmington, Delaware. Mark was next, replacing their AEM-7s with Siemens Chargers around 2017. The HHP-8s, however, got a second chance with rebuilds in 2018, but the AEM-7s are currently in storage. SEPTA then became the last railroad in North America to have AEM-7s and an ALP-44 in operation on their fleet, and used them on occasion during SEPTA-Geddon, but were sidelined for some rest in favor of the leased ACS-64s and a leased ALP-46 from New Jersey Transit. Still, even SEPTA knew retirement of the AEM-7s was in their future too. On December 19, 2013, the Catching Up Plan was announced by General Manager Jeffrey Knuppel, and the AEM-7s were listed for replacement in Phase 1 of the Vehicle Replacement section of the plan. Amtrak's 664 was leased to SEPTA in 2016 for testing the locomotive before buying them. Tests were completed with success, and in 2014, SEPTA ordered 15 ACS-64s from Siemens, number 901 through 915. 901 entered service on July 11, 2018, running its first train on the Great Valley Flyer on the Paoli-Thorndale line. Eventually, as more and more entered service, SEPTA decided it was time. Some were used on late-night jail trains in the fall as like a sort of second retirement job, but soon all were retired by late November 2018, with a farewell excursion taking place on December 1st, 2018, running from Paoli to Suburban Station, with ALP-44 2308 and AEM-7 2301. Yours truly was on board that day. Boy, was that a fun time. But the story doesn't really end there, as after that excursion, all the AEM-7s and ALP-44 were transferred to New Jersey Transit, due to them still struggling to implement positive train control, with the exception of 2302 being used as a part source. And they are all still sitting in Morrisville, New Jersey yard, awaiting their new retirement life. Where the future will take them next isn't known yet, but they definitely were an important part in the history of the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transit Authority, serving SEPTA since 1964 and regional rail operations since 1983. Thank you so much for watching. I would like to thank the people who appear in the credits for photos and videos on these engines, including myself, of course. I'd also like to thank those who had donated to my GoFundMe page. If you wish to support my channel, please consider donating below or sharing it with others, even if you can or can't donate. I'll progress further in the history of SEPTA when I talk about the AEM-7's cousin, the ALP-44. So until next time, all aboard!
When the light is running low and the shadows start to grow and the places that you know seem like fantasy, there's a light inside your soul that's still shining in the cold, with the truth, the promise in our hearts. Don't forget, I'm with you.